Hello again. I cannot help but notice that momentum is building up to scrap any restrictions on the number of Ukrainians arriving in Britain. It is suggested that literally any number of these people should be able to come and live in this country. This is a terrible idea, and I thought I would explain why. Just to clear the ground a little, there are always wars being fought somewhere in the world and people suffering as a result and being rendered homeless. But I really don't see why the refugees from Ukraine are in a different category from the Muslims who have been driven out of Burma or the countless Africans made homeless by fighting on the borders of Ethiopia. We cannot allow every refugee from all wars anywhere in the world to come to this country. This is a general principle. Looking now at the specific case of large numbers of people from Eastern Europe, we have had experience of this already, and for ordinary people, by and large, the consequences have been uniformly negative. Viewers will recollect that the hundreds of thousands of Polish people, Romanians and Bulgarians who came to live in Britain. For the middle classes, this was something of a boon. It had the effect of reducing wages and meant that they could employ nannies, cleaners, au pairs, builders and plumbers more cheaply than before. For British workers, it meant increasing unemployment and lower wages, to say nothing of increasingly ferocious competition for affordable housing. Now that we have left the European Union, things have been looking a little more promising for British workers in this country. But that would change dramatically if another wave of hundreds of thousands of Eastern Europeans turned up here. The immediate result would be to depress wages once more and to put even more pressure on housing. Then too, there is the effect on the culture and general atmosphere in Britain. Again, this does not really affect the middle classes, who are the driving force behind the current demand to allow as many Ukrainians into this country as wish to come here. People living in Lincolnshire towns like Boston have seen the character of their hometowns change out of all recognition in the last decade or so. They have become accustomed to seeing groups of surly-looking foreigners standing around in the centre of town, eyeing the girls and spitting on the pavement. Cheap housing there is now monopolised by such people, to the exclusion of the sons and daughters of those whose families have lived in the area for centuries. The area where I live is a working-class district, Debden. It's on the outskirts of London, at the farther end of the Central Line, which is a tube line in London. It is a large housing estate built after the end of the Second World War to house those from the East End whose homes were destroyed during the Blitz. I felt at home here when I moved to the area just over 20 years ago, because everybody here had a common heritage. And all the people I saw had roots in East London and relatives in places like Romford and Hornchurch. My family roots were in the East End, and all my uncles and aunts moved out to places like Dagenham and Romford after the war. It made me feel at home when I came here. That's all changing. These days, I'm as likely to hear Romanian spoken by young mothers with their children in the streets, and most of the houses which are being sold in my street are going to Bulgarians and Romanians. On the way to the shops from my house is a little church called St Nicholas. It's in Rectory Lane. I used to worship there from time to time. It belonged to the Church of England. In the graveyard of St Nicholas is rather a curiosity. It's the tomb of Sarah Martin, who wrote the nursery rhyme Old Mother Hubbard, with which viewers are sure to be familiar. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to get her poor dog a bone. A few years ago, the Church of England very sneakily sold that lovely little church with its marvellous English connections to the Romanian Orthodox Church. They didn't tell anybody about this, and you'll find nothing about it if you Google St Nicholas Church, Loughton. At least you won't if you Google the subject in English. If you do in Romanian, you'll find that it's widely advertised. You will notice it, though, when on Sundays you see 50 cars parked along Rectory Lane, and it suddenly dawns on you why so many Romanians are moving into the district. I have nothing against Romanians, but had I wished to live in a Romanian district, which Debden is now becoming, then I would probably have moved to Bucharest rather than Debden in 1999. As I say, this sort of thing is a great boon to the middle classes, who do not, of course, live in former housing estates like Debden. If you are a barrister or an architect, an MP or a business executive, then the cheap labour is simply wonderful. It is not so wonderful for working men and women, though. Thinking of my own family in the past, I cannot believe any of them would have benefited from immigration of this kind. My Uncle Phil was a builder and lived in Hornchurch. My Uncle Bob worked for Ford's in Dagenham. And my nan lived in Romford and went out charing until she was almost 80. They would all have seen their jobs at hazard from large-scale immigration from Eastern Europe, and now the kind of people who will suffer in the next year or two if we allow a couple of 100,000 people from Eastern Europe to enter the country. This whole business is a middle-class racket. There is nothing in it for us at all. Unless any of my viewers happen to be Guardian reading intellectuals, of course, in which case this will be a fantastic chance to get your house done up cheaply in a couple of years, to find a cleaner who charges even less.